When Claire looked out the window of the small cabin in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, the freshly fallen snow covered the pine trees like a blanket of purity that contrasted with the uneasiness in her heart. The cutting December wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the premonition that this would be a day different from all others. She didn't know yet that her next actions would unleash a sequence of events that would shake the foundations of everything she believed in. The kitchen exuded the comforting aroma of cinnamon and walnuts, while Claire meticulously prepared a special cake. Her experienced hands worked the dough with the care of someone who knows every secret of cooking, but there was something more in that gesture. A silent farewell, a final act of love for someone who had always occupied a special place in her life. Beth, her childhood friend, would leave the next day for a new life in San Francisco, leaving behind decades of shared memories in those frozen mountains. The two women had grown up together in that isolated region, where each family knew the secrets and pains of the others. Beth had always been different from the other young women in the area. There was a mystery about her that Claire had never been able to completely decipher, a shadow in her gaze that suggested untold stories and wounds that time had not healed. Even so, or perhaps because of that, the friendship between them flourished like the wildflowers that sprouted among the rocks in spring. Ben, Claire's husband, watched from afar while she put the finishing touches on the cake. He was a man of few words, shaped by years as a sheriff in a region where the law was often written with gunpowder and blood. His past carried invisible scars, memories of injustices that never found reparation, and nights when sleep fled like a frightened animal. There was something about Beth that always bothered him, a visceral sensation he couldn't explain, as if she were a piece that didn't fit in the puzzle of that peaceful community. When Beth arrived to pick up the cake, the encounter was charged with contradictory emotions. Claire hugged her with the intensity of someone who knows they're saying goodbye to a part of themselves. Beth, in turn, held the cake with an almost reverential delicacy, as if that simple culinary gesture represented much more than it appeared. Her eyes, normally cold and calculating, shone with a tear she quickly disguised. The conversation between the two friends flowed as always, full of childhood memories and plans for the future. Beth spoke about her expectations regarding the new life in the big city, about the opportunities that awaited her, and how difficult it would be to leave behind everything she knew. Claire, in turn, expressed her sadness about her friend's departure, but also her joy at seeing her finally pursuing her dreams. Neither mentioned the secrets they kept, the fears that haunted them, or the truths that could destroy everything. Ben kept his distance during the visit, greeting Beth with the cold courtesy of someone fulfilling a social protocol. He noticed how she avoided his direct gaze, how her hands trembled slightly when he approached, and how she seemed to be constantly calculating each word before pronouncing it. These details, imperceptible to Claire, were glaring to someone trained to read between the lines of human behavior. The farewell was brief, but loaded with meaning. Beth hugged Claire one last time, whispering words of gratitude that sounded more like a request for forgiveness. She left carrying the cake, but leaving behind an atmosphere charged with tension that Ben felt as an omen. Claire, in turn, remained on the porch watching Beth's figure disappear among the pines, not knowing she was seeing her friend for the last time. Night fell over the mountains with the characteristic speed of winter, bringing with it a cold that penetrated to the bones. Claire and Ben dined in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. She ruminated on the sadness of farewell, while he tried to decipher what had been wrong with that encounter. The instinct sharpened by years of experience in dangerous situations whispered in his ears that something wasn't right, but he couldn't identify exactly what. During the early morning hours, Ben was awakened by a strange noise coming from the kitchen. He got up silently, grabbed his weapon, and went down the stairs with the caution of a predator. What he found left him perplexed. On the kitchen table, there was a small package that definitely hadn't been there when they went to sleep. Upon opening it, he discovered a piece of the cake that Beth had taken, accompanied by a note written in handwriting he didn't recognize. The note was enigmatic, containing only a few words that seemed to be part of a code. The circle closes where it all began. Justice has its own way of finding the path back. Ben examined the piece of cake with the meticulousness of an investigator, noticing something that had previously gone unnoticed. Embedded in the dough, almost imperceptible, there was a small metallic object that glowed faintly in the lamplight. Carefully, he extracted the object and cleaned it. It was a tiny medallion, no bigger than a coin, made of silver and engraved with symbols that awakened memories long buried in his mind. His heart raced when he recognized the design. A snake intertwined with a rose, the distinctive symbol of a gang that had terrorized the region decades ago. The gang led by a man whose name was still whispered with fear by the older residents of the region. The memories returned like an implacable avalanche. Ben remembered the night his family was brutally murdered by members of that same gang when he was just a 20-year-old young man. He remembered the leader, a man with cold eyes and a cruel smile, who ordered the execution of his parents and siblings as if he were asking for a glass of water. He remembered how he managed to escape by miracle, hiding among the corpses of his own family until the assassins left. The medallion in his hands wasn't just an object, it was a message, a sign that the past had returned to collect its debts. But how did Beth fit into this story? How could a young woman he had known since childhood be connected to the demons of his past? The questions multiplied in his mind like weeds, each one more disturbing than the last. Ben spent the rest of the early morning examining every detail of the medallion, trying to decipher its meaning. The engraved symbols told a story he was just beginning to understand. The snake represented betrayal, while the rose symbolized revenge disguised as beauty. Together, they formed an emblem that had been used by the gang to mark their victims before executing their diabolical plans. When the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in golden and pink tones, Ben made a decision that would change everything. He needed to discover the truth about Beth, about her connection to the medallion, and about what had really happened the night before. Claire was still sleeping deeply, oblivious to the whirlwind of revelations that was about to shake her life. Ben watched her for a moment, knowing that soon he would have to share with her discoveries that could destroy everything she believed in. The investigation began that morning, when Ben decided to visit the old files at the sheriff's office. As a former law officer, he still had access to documents that could shed light on the mystery unfolding before him. What he discovered in the police records from the 1870s confirmed his worst fears and revealed connections he could never have imagined. The dusty files of the sheriff's office held secrets that Ben had preferred to forget. As he leafed through the documents, yellowed by time, each page revealed fragments of a truth he wasn't prepared to face. The name he was looking for finally appeared in a report dated 1874. Marcus Sullivan, the gang leader who had destroyed his family, described as a 40-year-old man, dark hair and a characteristic scar on his left face. What shocked him most was discovering that Marcus Sullivan had had a daughter, a girl of only 5 years old at the time of the massacre, who had disappeared after her father's death in a confrontation with the law. The child's name was registered as Elizabeth Sullivan, but everyone knew her by the nickname Beth. Ben's blood froze when he understood the magnitude of the revelation. The Beth that Claire considered her best friend was, in fact, the daughter of the man who had destroyed his life. The records indicated that the girl had been found by a family of farmers who raised her as their own daughter, changing her surname and building a new identity to protect her from the stigma of being a criminal's daughter. During all these years, Beth had lived just a few miles away from the man who had witnessed her father's death, without either of them knowing about the connection that united them. Ben understood that the cake hadn't been just a farewell gesture. It was part of a meticulously elaborated plan, a way for Beth to deliver to him the key to understanding who she really was. The medallion was her paternal inheritance, the last vestige of a lineage marked by violence and thirst for revenge. But why had she chosen to reveal it now? What did she intend with this revelation? The answer came when Ben discovered other documents that detailed the activities of Marcus Sullivan's gang. They weren't just common criminals, but part of an organized network that operated in several cities in the region. The medallion served as an identification symbol among members, but also as a coded map that indicated the location of hidden treasures and escape routes. Beth hadn't just inherited her father's name, but also his most valuable secrets. While Ben dove deeper and deeper into the investigation, Claire woke up and found his absence strange. She found the note he had left explaining that he needed to resolve some matters in town, but something in his tone left her uneasy. The house seemed different without her husband's comforting presence, as if the shadows had come to life during the night. Claire decided to clean the kitchen, and it was then that she noticed something strange. There were cake crumbs on the table, but she was sure she had cleaned everything the night before. Besides, one of the drawers was slightly open, as if someone had searched for something during the early morning hours. A shiver ran down her spine when she understood that someone had been in her house while they slept. The discovery made her question everything she thought she knew about Beth's visit. There was something about her friend's farewell that didn't seem genuine, a calculated coldness that she had attributed to the sadness of departure. Now, with evidence that someone had returned during the night, Claire began to wonder if she really knew the person she considered her best friend. Ben returned at the end of the afternoon with a somber face and the weight of revelations that changed his perspective on everything. He found Claire in the kitchen, preparing dinner with mechanical movements that betrayed her anxiety. The moment of truth had arrived, and he knew that the words he was about to pronounce would shake the foundations of the life they had built together. The conversation began hesitantly, with Ben trying to find the right words to reveal discoveries that seemed taken from a nightmare. He showed Claire the medallion and the note, explaining how he had found them and what they represented. Each word was like a stab in Claire's heart, who saw her reality crumble before her eyes. When Ben revealed Beth's true identity, Claire initially refused to believe. How could her childhood friend, the sweet and vulnerable girl who had grown up by her side, be the daughter of the monster who had destroyed her husband's family? Denial gave way to confusion, and confusion to horror when the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Claire remembered small details she had ignored over the years. The way Beth always avoided talking about her adoptive family, how she demonstrated uncommon knowledge about weapons and survival tactics, how her eyes became cold and calculating when she thought no one was watching, signs that she had interpreted as eccentricities of a complex personality, but that now revealed her true nature. The most devastating revelation came when Ben explained the meaning of the medallion and how it had been used by Marcus Sullivan's gang. Beth hadn't just discovered her true identity, but had also inherited her father's secrets and resources. The cake had been her way of delivering to Ben the key to understanding that she knew exactly who he was and what had happened to his family. Claire felt betrayed not only by Beth, but by her own naivety. During all these years, she had opened her heart and her home to someone who possibly saw her as a means to achieve her objectives. The friendship she considered genuine had been in fact a carefully orchestrated performance by a woman who carried the blood and instincts of a killer. Ben explained that Beth had probably spent years planning her revenge, studying his habits and vulnerabilities through her friendship with Claire. The cake had been her way of revealing herself, a theatrical gesture that matched the dramatic personality she had inherited from her father. But why choose that specific moment to reveal herself? What had changed for her to decide to abandon years of disguise? The answer came when Ben remembered a conversation he had had with Beth a few weeks before. She had asked about his retirement plans, about where they intended to live when he stopped being sheriff. At the time, he had interpreted it as natural curiosity from a family friend, but now he understood that she was collecting information for her own purposes. Beth had discovered that Ben and Claire were planning to move to a bigger city where he could work as a security consultant. The prospect of losing her main source of information about the man who had killed her father forced her to accelerate her plans. The cake had been her way of delivering the medallion before it was too late, ensuring that Ben knew exactly who she was before he could escape her reach. Claire understood that she had been used as a piece in Beth's chess game, an involuntary source of information about the man she considered responsible for her father's death. Each intimate conversation, each shared secret, each moment of vulnerability had been carefully catalogued and used to build a psychological profile that Beth could exploit when the moment for revenge arrived. Night fell over the mountains, while Ben and Claire tried to process the magnitude of the revelations. They understood that they weren't just dealing with a personal betrayal, but with a real threat to their safety. Beth had inherited not only her father's medallion, but also his network of contacts and resources. She wasn't alone in her quest for revenge. Ben explained to Claire that Marcus Sullivan's gang had been dismantled, but not completely destroyed. Some members had escaped and spread throughout the region, maintaining contact through secret codes and symbols. The medallion that Beth had left in the cake was a way to activate this dormant network, signaling that the leader's daughter had returned to claim her inheritance and complete the revenge her father hadn't been able to execute. The early morning brought with it a deceptive quietude that preceded the storm that was to come. Ben and Claire had barely managed to sleep, tormented by the previous night's revelations and the awareness that their lives were in imminent danger. The medallion remained on the kitchen table, like a silent reminder that the past had finally caught up with the present, demanding a reckoning that had been postponed for decades. Ben knew they needed to act quickly. His experience as sheriff told him that Beth hadn't revealed her identity without having a well-elaborated plan for what would come next. The fact that she had left for San Francisco could be a distraction maneuver, a way to establish an alibi while her accomplices executed the real revenge. He understood that underestimating Marcus Sullivan's daughter would be a fatal mistake. Claire struggled against contradictory feelings that threatened to tear apart her sanity. Part of her still refused to accept that the sweet girl she had known could be capable of such manipulation and cruelty. Another part, however, began to recognize signs she had ignored for years, small gestures and comments that now gained sinister meaning in light of Ben's revelations. The first confirmation that their fears were justified came when Ben discovered that the cabin where Beth had lived with her adoptive family had been empty for weeks. Neighbors reported that she had left abruptly, taking only a small suitcase and leaving behind all her belongings. Even more disturbing was the fact that no one knew where she had gone, and her answers about San Francisco seemed to have been an elaborate lie. Ben understood that Beth had spent weeks, perhaps months, preparing her revenge. She had used her friendship with Claire to map their routines, identify their vulnerabilities, and plan the perfect moment to attack. The cake had been just the first move in a much more complex and dangerous game than he had initially imagined. The investigation revealed that Beth had been in contact with former members of her father's gang, men who had spent decades hidden in the mountains, waiting for an opportunity to resume their criminal activities. The medallion wasn't just an identification symbol, but also a key that unlocked access to hidden resources and escape routes that Marcus Sullivan had established before his death. Claire discovered that her own house had been carefully studied by Beth during her visits. Small details that she had attributed to the natural curiosity of a friend revealed themselves as tactical reconnaissance. Beth knew exactly where Ben kept his weapons, how the house could be invaded, what the blind spots of the property were, and how to neutralize any defense system they might have. The most shocking revelation came when Ben found evidence that Beth had manipulated events in their lives for years. Small accidents, inexplicable financial problems, conflicts with neighbors that seemed to arise from nowhere. Everything had been orchestrated to keep them vulnerable and dependent on the friendship she offered. She had been simultaneously the cause of their problems and the source of their comfort. Ben understood that Beth had inherited not only her father's cruelty, but also his strategic intelligence. Marcus Sullivan had been a master of psychological manipulation, capable of making his victims trust him before destroying them. His daughter had perfected these skills, using her harmless appearance and her orphan story to disarm her victims' defenses. The situation became even more desperate when Ben discovered that Beth had left false clues about her whereabouts, creating a trail that led nowhere. While he and local authorities wasted time following fabricated tracks, she was free to execute the next phase of her plan. Time was running out, and Ben knew he needed to anticipate the movements of an adversary who knew his weak points better than he did himself. Claire was forced to confront the reality that she had been an involuntary accomplice to her own destruction. Each secret she had shared with Beth, each moment of vulnerability she had revealed, had been used to build the weapons that were now pointed at her and her family. Guilt threatened to consume her, but Ben reminded her that she had been the victim of sophisticated manipulation that few could have detected. The true extent of Beth's plan was revealed when Ben discovered that she had established contact with other enemies he had made during his years as sheriff. She had united disparate forces under the banner of revenge, creating an unlikely alliance of criminals who shared only the desire to destroy the man who had represented the law in a lawless region. Ben understood that he wasn't facing just Beth, but a conspiracy that had been years in gestation. She had used her position as a family friend to identify and recruit anyone who had reasons to hate him. The result was a network of enemies who knew his habits, his weaknesses, and his deepest fears. The final confrontation began when Ben and Claire discovered that their house was being watched. Shadows moved among the trees during the night, and small signs indicated that their property had been invaded and mapped. Beth had returned not to San Francisco, but to the mountains where it all began, bringing with her the ghosts of the past that demanded revenge. Claire was forced to make a decision that would define not only her future but also her soul. She could try to protect Beth, the girl she had loved like a sister, or defend her family against a threat she herself had inadvertently created. The choice was impossible but necessary, and the weight of its consequences would accompany her for the rest of her life. Ben prepared his defenses, knowing he would face not only Beth, but also the demons of his own past. The orphan girl he had ignored for years had transformed into the personification of his guilt and regret. She represented all the victims he hadn't been able to save, all the injustices he hadn't been able to correct, all the ghosts he had tried to bury. The final battle would not be just physical, but also moral and psychological. Beth had studied Ben long enough to know exactly how to hurt him where it hurt most. She didn't just want to kill him, but destroy everything he believed in, force him to question every decision he had made and every life he had tried to protect. When the confrontation finally came, it brought with it revelations that changed everything once again. Beth revealed that she had discovered evidence that Ben wasn't just an innocent victim of his family's massacre, but that he had been involved in activities that led to Marcus Sullivan's death. The truth was more complex than anyone had imagined, and the line between victim and villain became increasingly thin. Claire understood that she had been caught in the middle of a war that had begun long before she was born, a war between men who had chosen violence as a solution to their problems. Beth and Ben were products of a cycle of revenge that perpetuated itself through generations, and she was the only one who could break it or be destroyed by it. The outcome came with the force of an avalanche, bringing with it truths that no one was prepared to face. Justice, they discovered, wasn't an external force that arrived to resolve conflicts, but a choice that each person needed to make when confronted with the opportunity to perpetuate the cycle of violence or find a form of forgiveness that transcended the thirst for revenge. In the end, Claire and Ben discovered that the true victory wasn't in defeating Beth, but in understanding that forgiveness was the only weapon capable of breaking the chains that bound them to the past. Wisdom resided in recognizing that true justice didn't come from revenge, but from the capacity to choose a different path, even when the world around demanded blood for blood. The story ended not with the destruction that Beth had planned, but with a transformation that none of those involved had foreseen. The mountains witnessed not only the end of a cycle of violence, but the birth of a deeper understanding about what it means to be truly human in a world that often seems to have lost its humanity. If you made it this far, it's because you understand that the most powerful stories are those that force us to question our own choices and values. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that touch the heart and challenge the mind. And leave in the comments which moment impacted you most in this journey through the shadows of the past and the light of forgiveness.